I watched all 3 hours of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey so that you didn't have to.
That's my opinion!
Maybe you want to. I wouldn't say don't go see it. You know, I gave it a 3.5 stars on Letterboxd. I would say it's probably like a solid 6.5 out of 10. Maybe a 7. Parts were definitely a 7. But I feel like when you read the Odyssey or in other Greek mythology adaptations, Greek mythology as a whole, I feel, has this sense of whimsy to it. And that is why so many women, especially women in my peer group, resonate so deeply with Greek mythology. It goes beyond Percy Jackson, guys. However, I would say Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson, The Sea of Monsters is a better adaptation of the Odyssey than Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Disclaimer, I will be going over basically every single major beat in this movie, like the entire plot. This podcast will not only include spoilers, but is actually going to spoil the entire movie.
Ugh, spoilers.
As much as you can, I guess. The Odyssey has been around forever. I read it 3 separate times in school. Obviously, they were translated. It wasn't in the original Greek, so I'm sure there's still parts of the story that I am missing. And there's a lot of character names that slip my mind. But all you need to know is that I am a huge Iliad Odyssey fan. That is my main jam. And I would say in comparison to the other Odyssey movies I have seen, and this includes the Percy Jackson Sea of Monsters movie, TV show, is the best adaptation hands down. But the movie is a separate story. I would say this is the best film adaptation of the Odyssey I have seen, but it still didn't scratch the itch deep enough for me. We're gonna go over everything that I liked about this movie first, most being the technical elements, and then we will get into me ripping the script to shreds. Starting off strong with the costumes in this movie, honestly, one of the most major highlights. They are so beautiful. They are incredible. You can tell so much time and effort was put into them. I feel like the characters were represented, they were understood, and the costumes really did everything I needed them to. From a film perspective, this movie is gorgeous. It is so, so, so beautiful. And I really do think from a filmmaking perspective, this movie is groundbreaking. I do think that this movie should win every single technical Oscar in the next Oscar season. And I think it will. This movie is so incredibly made. It is beautiful, which given the context of the movie and the story is such a feat. I really could not applaud Christopher Nolan and his team more for the technical elements of this film. Now, the cast for this movie is insane. The lineup is all A-listers. So obviously, the performances are incredible across the board. Not a single one misses, not a single one lacks. But the thing about having such a star-studded cast is that every single face is recognizable, which did take me out of the movie a few times. You're watching the Odyssey and then you're like, oh, there's Mia Goth as a character with like literally 3 lines that very easily could have been an unknown actor. And for a movie and a source material that really tries to hammer home like, do unto others that you would like to be done unto you and throw the beggar a bone, it felt kind of weird to not have a single unknown actor in this cast. To set up the story before I, again, tear it to shreds, and I will not be critiquing every little thing that was changed or removed because I am aware of what it takes to adapt a story this major into a 3-hour film. But it feels like 2 hours maybe. It's very well paced. There's a lot going on the entire time. And I do think that the story is relatively easy to follow, at least for a Christopher Nolan movie. Because if you've seen Christopher Nolan movies, you know he doesn't give the whole movie away right away. He doesn't put it in your lap with a nice little bow on it. And unfortunately, the sound mixing in this movie is similar to that of Tenet. So some things you just can't fucking hear. The music is so fucking loud. The effects are so loud. And the dialogue is mixed so low. And since they're using these complex Greek names and words, sometimes things just kind of get lost in translation. I don't know why Christopher Nolan mixes his sound like that. I really don't, but that's just what he fucking does. So you do have to stomach that for the movie. But other than that, I would say it's relatively easy to follow. So we kind of follow two parallel timelines throughout the movie. We follow Odysseus' son, played by Tom Holland, and him traveling to Sparta to try to figure out what happened to his dad and save his mother from the dozens of suitors that are accosting them in the palace in Ithaca. He wants to find out what happened to his dad and potentially bring him home, or at least find out if he's dead so that he can take over the throne and save his mother from having to marry one of these god-awful men that are just shown feasting gluttonously and rampaging through the town. The other timeline we follow is Odysseus kind of recapping the first 2/3 of the Odyssey and the last little bit of the Trojan War. We get a little bit of the Trojan horse and the big battle of Troy. We meet Odysseus on the beach on Calypso's island when he's already been there for 7 years. So it's at the end of his time at the island. He's coming off of the lotus flower and he's starting to remember the events and recap them to Calypso. Obviously, they stop first on the Cyclops Island because that is such a pivotal and important part of the Odyssey. We see them using straw to disguise as sheep to escape, and we see how clever Odysseus is and how loyal he is to his men, and he dives back into the cave to save them when more are trapped inside. But we don't get the nobody bit from the original Odyssey. Now, in Homer's The Odyssey, the book, the Cyclops, who, by the way, is named Polyphemus, has this whole ordeal where Odysseus tells him that his name is Nobody. So when Odysseus and his men attack the Cyclops, he's screaming, "Nobody is attacking me, nobody is attacking me," because in the book there are also other Cyclops on the island with Polyphemus. And then because hubris is such a big theme in the book, it's not at all in the movie, but we'll get into that later. As they are on the boat leaving, Odysseus calls out to Polyphemus, and by the way, I'm Odysseus of Ithaca, fuck you, bitch. And because Polyphemus is Poseidon's son, Poseidon is angry, and basically the entire ocean is against Odysseus now while he is trying to sail home. That is literally the driving point of the story. And we don't get any of that in the movie. So we see how strategic he is in battle and how cunning he can be, but we don't really get any of that, like, witty kind of asshole Odysseus vibe, because Christopher Nolan kind of erases the fact that Odysseus is like a raging dick at the beginning of the Odyssey and then grows into himself and reflects on his actions in Troy as well as their journey home to grow and evolve. He kind of just erases all of that. So he saves his crew and then they're off of Cyclops Island and then they're like, oh no, like he called out for Poseidon, we're kind of fucked. But they just kind of move on. You know, there's not really any philosophy here, which to me defeats the point of making a movie about the Odyssey, but whatever. Then back in the Tom Holland timeline, he gets to Sparta, he meets the king, he meets Helen of Troy, who even with her nasty scar, she's gorgeous and I'd go to war for her. So Helen and the king tell Tom Holland about the Trojan War and what happened. So then we finally do get flashbacks of them in the horse, which is brutal. There's not a lot of blood per se, but there's a lot of just uncomfortable body moments in this movie. And one of them is them all being crammed in the fucking horse and like drowning and like standing on their drowned dead comrades while they're in the horse for days. But it is cool, and you can tell that again it is done practically and it works. The Trojan horse is so cool in this movie. And while Odysseus is dealing with Troy and his Odyssey, we get Zendaya as Athena popping in and out of the movie. And then back in the Odysseus timeline, we get to Circe. In the Odyssey book, Circe lives in a grand stone manor with a bunch of nymphs. And that is part of what makes her feel justified turning all of these men into animals, specifically Odysseus' men into pigs, is because she feels that they are going to take sexual advantage of the nymphs. So to prevent them from doing that, she turned them all into pigs. There are no nymphs in this movie. There's no whimsy in this movie. This movie lacks mythological whimsy, and honestly, I found it really upsetting. We will get into that more when we get to the sirens, but just know Circe lives in like a little hovel, a little run-down ruin of a hovel on top of a hill by herself. And then we get this whole sequence of literal body horror as she's transforming the men into pigs. Honestly, it was super fucking cool. It is the only time we see magic in this movie, which is crazy crazy given the source material. But it is cool watching her go through this body horror sequence transforming the men into pigs. And then we start hitting more changes that I feel like would have been easy to include and would have given the story more depth and have been truer to the source material. Like getting rid of the nobody scene with the Cyclops, which, by the way, they make a whole point to show you the Cyclops can talk and then never use it as part of the plot. So I don't know why the nobody scene wasn't there. And I don't know why Circe isn't the one to warn Odysseus about Scylla. She tells him about the underworld. She tells him to go and find Elliot Page. And then they do. They go to the underworld quite easily, which, again, I understand. They only have so long to make this movie. They can't show all of the trials and tribulations of getting to Hades, but they get to Hades. I thought it was really cool how the dead like kind of zombie up out of the ground, and then Elliot Page comes forward and gives this whole spiel about how he sacrificed himself for his brother, and in his death has realized that he was tricked by his brother. And his brother, played by Robert Pattinson, who we will get to later, he's in the Tom Holland timeline. He's a total dickhead, and he fucked over Elliot Page, and then Elliot Page died in the war, and it was Odysseus' fault, and he's really pissed about it. So he tells Odysseus to take the token that he was given when he was chosen for the war and give it back to his brother with his shame. Odysseus is warned about Scylla, and then all of his men will die, and he is sent on his way. Something else that I actually really, really enjoyed about the underworld sequence was this whole bit that they have with Pausanias, who at this point in the movie is really only shown like from the back or in this crazy Spartan helmet, and he looks honestly very godly. He looks very strong. It's very reminiscent of Ares. And then when we see him again in the underworld after he died and he tells the story of how he died, we see his face for the first time fully. And it really just showed that even though he was this big badass who literally won the Trojan War, he still died because he is still mortal just like everyone else. And now we see his face and he's a lot more humanized. And I thought that was beautifully done by Christopher Nolan. I really thought that that was such a beautiful and amazing choice to make him feel human only after he was dead, because we are all mortal in the end. And that is a very large theme of the Odyssey. And that is the only time in the movie that I think we really see it. Anyway, Odysseus is warned about Scylla in the underworld and then goes on his way. Back in the Tom Holland timeline, Robert Pattinson, the disgusting, gross older brother, is trying to fuck Anne Hathaway Penelope because he wants to be the next king. And Penelope is basically like, dude, like, you wish you were bad enough to be my husband. Fuck off. And so he does, and he goes and he like rallies a group of guys, and he's like, okay, we have to kill Tom Holland so there's no more heir, and then I'm gonna force Penelope to marry me. And they're like, okay, sick as fuck. How will we know which one is Tom Holland though? And Robert Pattinson is like, you'll know by his ears. He's got big ass fucking ears and a wonky ass nose. And they're like, got it. And then we're back again. And then we go back to the Odysseus timeline for the scene that I was most excited for, which is the siren scene. Now, guys, I have such an affinity for all things siren. That is my shit. That is my jam. It is the mythology that resonates deepest with me in literally every single folklore culture that there is possible. I fucking hated the siren sequence. I hated it so bad. I hated it so deeply. There are two major points to sirens. There is the singing, and then there is how they look. Now, I understand pulling off both, especially practically, is hard. So you can either pull it off with some real good costumes and makeup, or God forbid effects, and show me a really cool siren, and then kind of give me like a muted version of the audio in the scene, because the men on the ship do cover their ears in wax, so they can't be lured to the siren song. But Odysseus has been tied to a pole so that he can hear the siren song. Or you can show me some misty covered rocks where I know the sirens are, but I can't really see them, and then you can show me what they sound like. In this version of the Odyssey, they give me misty covered rocks where I can't see shit. I don't know what the sirens fucking look like. And we get a voiceover of Odysseus talking about what he heard instead of just letting us hear it. And again, I understand it is because like the sirens are up to your own interpretation. Like they come for what you truly want. It's different for everyone. I don't give a fuck fuck? This is a movie. Show me something cool. And again, from a practical level, this movie is shot super cool. The sword fighting sequences are super, super cool. I want to see some cool mythology. I want to see a cool siren. I want to see a cool monster. We got a super cool Cyclops. The Cyclops looks so cool. The magic of the pigs was so cool. The sirens were so dumb. They were so dumb, and I was so mad. And then we get a super quick cut to the next sequence, which is where Odysseus and his crew have to decide whether or not they're going to pass through a strait where we as the audience know Scylla is, because Odysseus was warned about Scylla. Now, in the Odyssey book, they decide to go through the strait, and it's dark, and Odysseus has to make a choice, knowing that if they go through the whirlpool, they might all live, but most likely the boat will wreck and they will all die. Or they can go through Scylla's strait, and he can sacrifice 6 of his men to the 6 heads of Scylla. So they go through the strait at night, and he lights 6 torches, and he chooses 6 people to sacrifice. But in this movie, it is bright as day. He's like, let's go to the whirlpool. And his first mate is like, no, let's go through the strait. And he just doesn't say anything. They go through the strait. Now all of a sudden the first mate's freaking out, and he's like, you knew that Scylla was there. You knew 6 of us were gonna die. And he was like, yeah, but if I told you, then you wouldn't have gone through it. I'm sorry. Did I miss something? Like, when did he say that they were gonna do that? It didn't make any sense to me. Maybe I missed it because the audio was mixed so fucking horrifically and it was so overstimulating of a sequence, but I don't think that that happened in the final cut of this movie. And not to mention, Scylla as a monster, so underwhelming. Just some like kind of gray dinosaur looking tentacles that shot out of a rock, grabbed 6 people, and then were gone in like 3 seconds. And I understand, like, that's the horror of it. That's the horror of it. It happens so quickly. I don't care. This is a movie about sea monsters. I want to see a sea monster. We saw a Cyclops. That was it. That was literally it. I want to see a sea monster in the sea of monsters. Jesus fucking Christ. Then we hit the beat where they get to Apollo's island with his cattle, and they kill a cow to eat it. And obviously the gods are pissed, and they get back on the boat knowing that they're basically all going to die. And then we get the most overstimulating shipwreck sequence. I literally couldn't watch it. I was gonna have a fucking stroke. There was so much strobe in that scene. It was so overstimulating. I literally had to look away, or I would have gotten a migraine and wouldn't have been able to finish the next hour and a half of this fucking movie. But at that point, we're back on Calypso's island, and Odysseus has wrapped up his story because that shipwreck is what ultimately stranded him on her island. So now we are caught up, and both of the timelines are in sync. He goes back to Ithaca, he saves his son from getting murdered, and he tells him to show back up on the island looking like a prince and not to tell anyone that he is Odysseus and Odysseus is alive. He says, don't say anything, just show back up looking like a prince. And in the next scene, Tom Holland rolls up literally in the same outfit that I'm pretty sure Prince Charming wears in Shrek 2. And then we see Anne Hathaway win her Oscar. I'm telling you right now, this is Anne Hathaway's Oscar. She gives the performance of a fucking lifetime as Penelope in this movie. Oh my God. She was honestly the only actor in this movie, with the exception of Robert Pattinson, but we'll get to that, who really made me feel something. She is so good. But beyond that, the most moving moment in this movie is when Odysseus finally makes it back to the palace, and his hunting dog, who's been alive for 20 years waiting for him to come home and is laying half dead on the front step of the palace, greets him and dies. That was very moving. That was the only moment in the movie that I actually went like, aww, and like people around me were crying. And then we see Robert Pattinson win his Oscar for supporting actor. Robert Pattinson also brings it fucking down in this movie. He is so incredible. He gives the performance of a fucking lifetime. I hated him so much as a sniveling little bitch in this movie. He's being a freak towards Anne Hathaway. He's being a dick to Odysseus and to Tom. And then we get this sequence of Odysseus reflecting on his actions in the Trojan War. And this is supposed to be his coming to moment. This is supposed to be Odysseus's moment where he realizes like the horror of war, and he abandoned Athena in the process, and he abandoned the gods, and nobody's treating each other right anymore. But because we lost all of of his character development across his journey, I didn't really fucking care. He says that while the battle was happening and he was watching like the horror of the pillaging and the raping and the murdering of the Trojans, he realized we as a civilization have been lost. But then he immediately goes and sacrifices like 21,000 men to get home to Penelope. But we don't get to see him make the decisions to actively sacrifice people. So it just kind of loses the moral of the story for me. Because how am I supposed to think that this man is reformed and grown and has earned back the respect of the gods and therefore won back Penelope if you got rid of all of the things that showed his growth and then also tried to say that the whole time he knew it was wrong and the only reason he was acting like that was because he was eating fucking lotus flowers and he forgot it on Calypso's island? Like, be so fucking for real. Because yes, a theme of the Odyssey is that war is bad. Yes, that is part of the Odyssey. However, the theme of the Odyssey is overcoming hubris. It's not just war is bad and we shouldn't do it because it's violent and it's gruesome. It's hubris causes war, so we have to overcome hubris. Hubris is arrogance and selfishness and greed. That is the root of the Odyssey. And we missed every major moment where we would have seen that, even though they were breadcrumbed, like them saying over and over and over again that Odysseus needs to go to the west and do a proper ceremony. That is him being instructed to put his hubris aside and go and do this for the people that he abandoned in his self-preservation. And they keep talking about it. And the movie ends with him sailing off into the sunset with Penelope. They say they're going to the west, but we never actually see him go and do those things. So the moral of the story is lost. They're telling us what it is, but they're not showing us any examples of it. Anyway, we get the whole sequence of him stringing the bow and then murdering all of the suitors, which again, after he gives this whole spiel about how like violence is unnecessary and we have to treat each other kindly, he just slaughters like an entire fucking room of guys, which to be fair, if people were acting like that in my house, like trashing it and eating all my food and drinking all my wine, I'd also kill every bitch in there. Anyway, we get this great moment when he kills Robert Pattinson, where he takes the token from Cinna, Robert Pattinson's little brother who was in the underworld, and he like shoves it in his mouth and he's like, take your shame, motherfucker, and then he kills him, and literally my entire theater cheered. Everybody was clapping. So do I think it was a true adaptation of the Odyssey? In some ways, yes. You know, like we hit all of the major plot points of the Odyssey. However, I feel like it abandoned all of the philosophies that are the driving point of Homer's works, and the moral of the story was really muddied and muddled and lost for me. I feel like I really would have enjoyed this movie more if it was just called Odysseus. And then all of the creative liberties they took, like changing weird things in the dialogue. The Scylla thing just makes me so upset, you guys. You don't even know. Especially because more than anything, it came down to dialogue. They took all of the lines containing important information said by Circe and Calypso, my biggest example in this podcast being Scylla, and they gave them to male characters for no reason. Because every single woman in the Odyssey is like a pillar character in literary history. They are strong women. But for some reason, they are so tweet little bird in this movie. And it really pissed me off. There was no reason for that change to be made other than the fact that they wanted to give all of the important information to a man. It had to come out of a man's mouth. And that is why I think this is the red pill version of Homer's The Odyssey. So I would say that this movie is worth seeing, definitely, especially in theaters, because of the technical aspects. While, yes, it'll still be fun and good to watch at home once it inevitably comes out on HBO Max, this movie is a technical feat, and it is really rewarding to see in theaters. However, if you are a huge Odyssey fan, lower your standards, because we lose all of the philosophy and all of the whimsy and like fantasy that comes with Greek mythology. This is how I imagine a movie being made about like ancient Rome, not ancient Greece. You know, like I feel like we lost like the magic and femininity of this story, and you can definitely tell that it was made by an old white guy. So is it good? Yeah, sure, I guess.